Hello, this is State Representative Wayne Christian. Today I want to visit with you real shortly about something I think is important for us to understand, and that's we're not all farming anymore. Now, why is that significant in our day and age? Understand, we went through in our society a time that years ago, back at the start of the 20th century, the majority of people farmed for a living, and that's where inflation occurred. That's where the growth in our economy was. We were farming, we were producing in the state of Texas. The greatest farming, producing land, and continue to be, but it was our major source of income. And thus we started educating our children. Providing for the best chance for the American dream is our public system of education. And the way we funded education is we based the taxes on what would be growing with the economy and providing growth of pay, growth of the expenses of our school systems through agriculture. And we have a property tax. And so that's the way our forefathers founded our public school system to be funded. But then our society moved from farming as the basic economic engine to manufacturing. And we started being a manufacturing economy. And the manufacturing sector came to Texas, and we started building machinery. The city started booming, industry started booming across the state, oil and gas came in, but we still taxed and funded public education as if we were all farming by taxing the land, property taxes. And then later, in this day and age, we moved away from agriculture as the basis of our economy, from manufacturing as the #1 producer in our economy. We now have a service industry in the state of Texas. Yet we're still taxing and funding public education as if we were all farming. And thus the title of this little program I'm doing today is called, We're Not Farming Anymore, but we are funding public education as if we were. Fact is, we are funding through property taxes, the majority of our education system in Texas. Now let me tell you folks, only 1 out of 4 citizens in Texas actually own property. That means only 25% of the people are paying taxes toward educating 100% of the children. That means 75% of folks aren't paying a nickel toward funding public education through the scope of property taxes. Now, the argument is, well, what do you do? Let me tell you why we don't address the problem. Right now we're bumping the head of our poor school superintendents and administrators and school boards across this state. Our teachers aren't getting enough dollars at times for what they need and are requesting. And we in the Texas legislature, in our balanced budget constitution, cannot create this credit card called deficit spending. We're told we have only this much money to spend, and we have to divide it between the different services government has, which leaves us very little flexibility to increase significantly funding for public education. And so our public schools locally are running out of money. And the trouble is, politicians will not, in most situations I learned, address a tax issue unless it's a requirement, a catastrophe, and they are forced into dealing with taxes. Why is that? Because taxes make people unhappy. Unhappy people vote for the other guy and kick the incumbent out. And so politicians go ex-nay, Wayne, we're not going to take care of funding a tax problem when there's no crisis at hand. Now let me see the logic to that one. The logic is we're not going to address the problem of public education and funding and property taxes or finding a tax system fairer and more competent to take care of the needs of our public school systems until we're forced in a crisis to do it. That's responsible. I introduced a bill last session that simply said that by 2 sessions away, 2012, we would be no longer funding public education through property taxes. Guess what? Never got out of committee. Nobody, no politician wants to talk about it. And people say, well, Wayne, what would you do? What are the options? My bill wasn't for the need, and I'm not advocating today how we're going to do it. I'm just saying until we put a date up there that we're not going to do it and have 4 years to consider the different options, we will reasonably go about researching it rather than the current method of waiting till the schools shut down, don't have enough money to pay anybody, and then we have an emergency session, or in one session try an emergency 2 or 3 months to fix the whole problem and wind up with an incomplete, unresearched method of taxation that nobody's happy with. I would rather do it the more reasonable, researched manner. And people say, well, what's the option? Well, there's lots of options, and I'm not advocating any one day, but let me tell you real quickly. The amount to fund public education is somewhere in the $16 to $17 billion amount. Number two, We have right now, under the current tax systems of just sales tax, over 30 billion of exemptions to the current sales tax. So while the fight would be to who does and who doesn't get exempted, I promise I don't know many times what groceries I pay for taxes on and what I don't when I check out at the grocery store. So there's enough exemptions to the current sales tax to totally fund and replace property taxes. We could increase sales taxes by, say, 1 cent and stay competitive in neighboring states. I've given you just 2 examples of what we can negotiate. But folks, the problem is we're not acting as that. We're acting as if we were still all farming. And folks, that's going to destroy public education.